for doing this with me. My name is Yihan Zhao, and today I'm going to interview you. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. My name is Vonn Mahoney.
Uh-huh.
I am 70 years old. I am a very blessed man. I did not die in Vietnam, and I was not wounded in Vietnam because I did not go to Vietnam, but I was in the military during the Vietnam War. When I went in the Army, I actually joined the Army in 1968, so I'd been in almost a year. In the Army, I was drafted, or I was coming up to be drafted, so I volunteered to be drafted because I thought I was going to get out and get married, but that didn't happen. But anyway, the Vietnam War was going on, and when I went in the Army, they give you what they call a dream sheet, and they say, if you were going to go overseas, where would you like to go? And I said, well, they had the options were Europe, Alaska, South Korea, or Vietnam, and one other place, maybe Hawaii or something. And I knew that there's some people are going to want to go to Vietnam, and everybody else want to go to Europe or any place but Vietnam. Some people wanted to go to Vietnam, and a lot of people didn't. So I thought, well, where's a place that nobody would want to go, or that would choose? And I thought, well, Korea. So I put in Korea. Well, in 1969, North Korea, unprovoked, shot down an EC-121 spy plane that was flying off the coast of North Korea, and they shot it down somehow. And I really don't believe, and I didn't believe at the time that it was for revenge, but it was an aggressive act, and the United States government thought maybe North Korea was going to start hostilities again and do some more stuff. So they sent 5,000 troops to South Korea just in case something escalated. It wasn't to start anything, it was to protect South Korea from aggression from the north and protect the soldiers that were already there, the American soldiers. There were quite a few thousand there already. Well, they sent 5,000 more just in case. You know, there were no other overt hostilities while I was there. Just a few shooting across the demilitarized zone. So the only connection was it happened at the same time. In the middle of Vietnam, North Korea did this unprovoked killing of Americans, and we responded. And that's how I ended up there. They do what they call a levy, and they gather troops from all different areas of the Army and the Air Force and stuff, and they put together a force of 5,000, and they sent them over there, and I was part of that group.
Wow. Okay. I'm also wondering why there were very little public resource online that were talking about the thing happened between American and the North Korean. What was going on at that time?
Well, Vietnam, you know, it was consuming all the news. There was a lot of anti-war protests at that point in time in 1969. There were a lot of racial tensions going on in the military and other places. And after the initial shooting down of the spy plane, there were no other actions, so it died down quickly, you know, a couple of months later. So you found the reference to the plane being shot down, but other than that, there was nothing newsworthy happened. There was the time I was there and beyond, there were no other overt aggressions.
Okay, I see. Thank you. Oh, I guess you already told me why did you choose to join the military, because
I was going to get drafted, which means you didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
All I had a choice was, I said, take me next month.
Oh, oh, so
That was a choice.
you can choose to.
It's called volunteering for the draft.
Oh.
So I went a little earlier. I was gonna go, but I just went a little earlier.
Okay, I see. As a soldier, like based on your real experiment, what do you think about this war or any war, like just a war?
Well, I wish there weren't any wars, but if we are going to fight a war, I think it ought to be a war that you would want to win the war. And the war in Vietnam never was called a war; it was called a police action. And during Vietnam, and I had cousins that did go to Vietnam and got wounded and stuff. None of them died, but they were not allowed to go out and advance their position. They would go out and fight the enemy, come back, and so the enemy was always all around. So it was never a win the war type of a war. So my feeling for war is if you have to fight a war, you fight it to win it, and you declare it as a war. It never was called a Vietnam. It never was called by the U.S. government a war. It was called a police action.
Police action.
They were policing the country, trying to keep the North Vietnamese from taking it over.
I see. So, when you were in North Korea, I was curious about how you communicate with Korean soldiers. Like, would you mind to telling me how you live, like food, clothes, or like life support?
Well, we had, mess halls where you'd eat. You'd lived together in they were Quonset huts, metal rounded buildings. Maybe you've seen them. They're called Quonset huts, made of corrugated metal, and that's what most of the people we lived in there. A company would live in one, maybe 20 some people in one barracks, and then we go to the mess hall to eat. Or some people spent a lot of time out with the Koreans, living off the base on your time off. You could go live out there if you chose, and a lot of people did spend their time not in the barracks, out with the Korean people, doing whatever, not so good stuff.
Oh, I see. So, like, you mean you guys live together, or all Americans live together?
Yes.
Okay.
They had a base. It's called Camp Casey, is where I was at. 7th Infantry Division headquarters. And as far as I know, there were no no South Koreans in that base. They had their own bases.
Oh, okay.
I had one Korean friend that got drafted into the Korean Army, South Korean Army, and he went off to training, and I went up to see him one time with a taxi and took him a radio, but that was basically the only interactions I had personally with the Korean Army, and I got to meet the company commander because it was a big deal for an American soldier to actually visit a South Korean Army base. So they took me into I was just not a sergeant or anything, a specialist, but they took me in to see the company commander. So it was a big deal for them to have me come to their base and visit the soldier.
Okay, that's good to know. And do you like the food?
I like the Korean food, and the military food is not that great. But.
Oh, okay. I saw you only served the military, like for the background that you gave to me, and for 1 year.
2 years, actually.
2 years.
I was in almost a year in the United States before I went to South Korea.
Okay. So after that, you just came to America and now going anywhere else? Like.
I got out after 2 years to the day.
Okay.
On May 14th, I was still in Korea, and that was the day I was supposed to get out of the Army. But they said, get your stuff, you're leaving. Because of the time difference, later on that same day, I was ushered out of the Army. So I flew all the way back over here, like 10 hours.
10 hours.
Or 12 hours. Got off the plane, went through the process, and was out of the Army and the civilian. And 2 years later, they called me back because I was what they called inactive reserve. And 2 weeks later, they called me back for 2 weeks of summer camp. So I served 2 years and 2 weeks.
Oh, okay. These 2 years, is there a lot of people died?
Not around me. A lot of people died in Vietnam, and a lot of people were wounded. I mean, like I have one of my first cousins is still suffering from the wounds that he received in Vietnam. So a lot of people died, but very few, if any, died in South Korea. It was probably an accident, vehicle accident or something. But as far as I know, no Americans other than those 31 on the plane were killed in the year I was there.
Okay.
Not that I heard of.
Okay, I see. So, like you said, you flew to home. So, did you need to pay for the flight tickets?
No.
No, they just.
No, I had to pay to get home from where they let me out in Washington. But other than that, they didn't pay me. They didn't pay my ticket home. They flew me to the base where I was getting out, and then I was on my own.
Okay.
So I hitchhiked, rode a bus.
Oh, so at that time you also had some money in your pocket,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yes, they paid you. You know, you got your pay. So when I ushered out, they gave me what was due me, just the money that I had coming.
Okay.
Kind of closed my account, so to speak.
Oh, the war caused you some spiritual problems like PTSD? 'Cause I heard a lot of soldiers had that after they got.
I was not in any. I was not in any combat. Any spiritual problems I had when I went in and had when I came out. My spiritual problems were corrected by the Lord later on, not while I was there. I had plenty of spiritual problems, but I had them when I went in the military.
Okay.
Issues that I already had, and I had when I got out.
Okay.
So there was 2 or 3 years after I got out before the Lord started dealing with my issues. So it had nothing to do with the military.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. If you have a son, would you like him to go to the war?
Not at all.
Not at all.
No.
No.
I don't think anyone. Well, I wouldn't, and maybe somebody whose career was in the military. That was their life, but for me, it was an interruption to life. And a lot of young people, I guess like 56,000 plus died in Vietnam, and maybe 200,000 more were wounded or something. So it was very, very hard on a lot of families and very traumatic. And I would not want any relative of mine to have to go to war. I mean, wars happen, and we have to fight for what we believe in our nation and like that. But I would not like any member of my family to have to do that.
Yeah, I totally got it. I understand. So, last question for you is, when you were in the war, what were you thinking about at that time? Like homesick? I think so.
What was I thinking about? I was thinking about how I wished I wasn't in the Army. How I wish I was home, and not where I was at. I thought I wanted to go see the world when I went to Korea. I didn't have to go to South Korea. The job I had in the Army in the United States, my sergeant, the person that was over me, said, "I'd like you to stay here, I like the job you're doing. You're on this levy or this order to go to South Korea, but I can get you off of that if you want me to. You can stay right here for your rest of your time in the Army." And I said, "Well, I think I'd like to go see the world." I regretted saying that afterwards, but because it was not a great experience being in Korea for me at that point in my life. So. But yeah, it happens with life, So, but anyway, yeah.
But I thought it would be like, at least it has some good side of it. Like, I heard that after you get out, you become a fire captain into
Yes, I did. Let's see, I got out of the Army in 1970, and I had several different jobs between 1970 and 1974 when I joined the fire department. I worked in the oil fields. I ran a small sawmill. I was the sawyer. I sawed the the logs into boards, and had several people working under me. I did that for a while. I sold real estate. I cut wood for a living, and I worked on construction when I first came to Tucson, building houses. So I had many different jobs, and worked as a pipe fitter for a little while. So I had many different jobs, and when I was actually cutting wood,
Yes.
and my friend said, "Why don't you go take the fire department test with me?" And I said, "Why would I want to do that? I didn't know they paid firemen." And he told me what the benefits were and what the pay was. The pay was $795 a month, which in 1973 was pretty good pay.
Wow, that's
a month.
good.
Yeah, so I was dating my wife then, and I thought, maybe I need a better career than cutting wood, So I went and took the test, and I did very well. So I became a fireman, and so it was good.
Yeah.
That was good. The Lord blessed me, and has continued to bless me. So
I know. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me.
You're entirely welcome.
Yeah, thank you for your time. And I got a lot through this conversation today, and I like those kind of questions. I don't think I can find the answer online. And
Probably not. About the part about wanting revenge, I don't think that was part of it back then. I think it was more preventative, because they thought they were going to be aggressive and do more. They didn't.
They didn't.
North Korea did not.
Okay.
So.
Well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
And have a good day.
All right.